What's good, guys? Welcome back. So today's topic is signal flow, or which order you put your effects in, right? Or how you process things. And the order really matters. It makes a big difference. Now, I just want to say that it's going to be a general guideline. This is not a one-size-fits-all, but generally this type of information I'm going to give you should work. Obviously, you have to think about what type of processing you can do for each element and what your desired result wants to be, right? So yeah, this is going to be a general guideline, nothing set in stone, but I'm going to walk you through this because I've been doing online lessons and with a couple students, and they've been asking, which order do I put my plugins in? And I thought this might be valuable to you and your production needs. So enough chit-chatting, and let's dive in. All right, guys. So I did a little bit of prep this time, so it's a good thing. We have like a general signal flow guideline here that I wrote in Microsoft Word. I'm gonna see if I can put this on the website so that way you guys can download it. It's gonna be completely free. So I'll try to work on that. Bear with me, try to get that link down there. But typically, like I mentioned earlier, signal flow is the way you order things. So the first thing that you usually find here is going to be the sound source, right? Serum, operated diva, or audio sample, a vocal, whatever it is. I always recommend to keep the gain staging clean, make sure there's no digital clipping and so forth. So typically when you start with the sound, you want to make sure the volume's low. You can boost at the end during your mastering stage. That really helps out a lot with the digital clipping, so things aren't freaking being squashed for various reasons, right? Then I like to do a subtractive EQ. So, remove any unnecessary low end, right? Make sure to get rid of any harsh resonating noises. So if you hear like something that's really resonating and really high pitched or making the mix muddy or to make it sound nasty, you want to reduce that. And then you start hitting dynamics, right? This is a compression, gate. I typically like to have a light compression here, depending on what it is, right? Just to get some controls on the peaks, kind of bring everything and make it more, how do I say this, more uniform. Not too much though, just so we can still have some dynamics. And then if you want to throw a gate on there, you can, to remove any background noise, so forth. Then I'll do tone shaping. This is another EQ that you throw on top. This is where, let's say you have a vocal, you want a little more air. You would boost that, right? Maybe like 3K hertz. Then you go saturation. So saturation is drum buff, Saturn 2, or even the Ableton saturator. This is going to create some warmth into your track or your individual instrument, and it really makes a big difference. And then we have modulation effects, chorus, flanger, distortion. I wouldn't even put distortion on saturation, honestly. So I'll probably change that at some point. The next thing is time-based effects. What time-based effects are, just like reverb or delay. Typically, I like to put these on a return track, which I'll show you how to do in a bit. The reason that I do that is because it keeps things clean and consistent. If you were to put a reverb directly onto the channel, which has its purpose, it sends things to the back of the mix, which I'll show you an example later as well. So that's why I always recommend to put these time-based effects on a return track. Next is stereo imaging. If you want to make things a little wider, if you want to put things in mono, this is also where you would put that. If it's something in mono, I typically want to put that at the beginning, right after the sound source. But any other stereo imaging, I put it towards the end. And then I'll throw a clipper on it too, depending on how the sound is coming out. If I need to get rid of those big peaks, I'll go ahead and throw a clip. And then last but not least, I'll throw a sidechain in there. You can use the Ableton compressor, but you can use Kickstart or LFO tool as well. All right, now we're going to go into the individual instrument breakdown. Once again, this is just a general guideline, and obviously I'm going to go through one by one in Ableton to show you how all this looks like inside Ableton. Typically, I'll do a reduction EQ, right, for piano and keys. I'll do a light compression or OTT, right? I'll probably just bring down the dry wet signal a little bit. And saturation, I like to put the saturation after the compression, but some people like it before. It all depends, like I said, your desired outcome. And then I'll do reverb and delay, right? Often short, too aggressive. And I'll put these in the return track like we discussed before, unless I really want to put something like the pianos in the back of the mix. And then I'll do light sidechain on drops typically, unless I really want to have that Swedish House Mafia effect, then I'll go heavy on the sidechain. Vocals, I'll remove any unnecessary low end, right? I'll do about typically 3 stages of compression. I'll probably do 1 peak control and then the other 2 maybe like tone. Again, I'll show you an example of 2 of the stages out of the 3 because one of my plugins, I guess, isn't working at this moment. So I have to fix that. I'll do a de-esser if I'm recording, right? This is obviously after I've set up a session and recorded the vocalist with the gate and deep breath and all that stuff. But sometimes I'll catch myself needing another de-esser to get rid of that harsh S sound. A little bit of saturation and then obviously reverb delay on the send channel. And then if you're gonna have it on the drop, I like to do a very light sidechain on it. But this is optional. I personally like to do it just to have a little more space for the kick, since this is dance music. And then we have a kick, right? Kick, I like to put the utility here. I'll put the bass in mono, right? And then I'll do EQ or MB compression. There's a cool preset which I'll show you that I really like. A transient shaper if needed, if you want a little more of transient or high in the kick. And compression, you know, usually the kick samples that you get already are processed, like especially if you get mine, I already process it to where you just drag and drop. But sometimes you need a little more, you know, and that's where it is. And then if you could do a little saturation too. Next is bass. So very similar to the kick, anything that involves low end, I'll put the bass in mono using the utility. EQ, I'll do a high pass. So I'll actually cut out the high end. I usually don't go past 200 hertz. There's been times where I go 220, maybe for like a respace or so, maybe even 250 if there's a respace involved. Compression, I'll do a little bit of a moderate, little heavier on this just to add some more consistency on the bass. Saturation and distortion, I really go ham. And then I'll do again another subtractive EQ, because when you add something like distortion or saturation, it starts boosting the frequency. So you want to make sure to remove any of those booster frequencies. And then for the sidechain compression on the drops, it's got to be a heavy sidechain to make room for the kick. Synths, these are like serum, leads, pads, plugs. Very similar, get rid of unnecessary low end, compression, or OTT depending on your desired outcome. So it could be a gentle or a saturation, right? Get some color, some energy. And then obviously reverb and delay, chorus and phaser if you need that. And then light to heavy sidechain and drops depending on what you'd like. And then percussions, just remove unnecessary low end. That's what I typically do. This other stuff is optional. The one thing I do use here besides the EQing is I do like a panning depending on what I'm doing. So I'll do like an auto pan, really slow pan left to right. Now general guidelines, you know, always gain stage first, right? Set the proper input levels, make sure things are digitally clipping, and leave some room for the master. You know, use a high pass EQ on almost everything except the kick and bass. And then use return tracks for reverb and delay instead of a direct insert, keeps things cleaner. Sidechain bass all the time, and mostly light sidechain the synths and pads to the kick when that's present. And then also, last but not least, keep the low end in mono, and then you can spread or stereo image just a little bit of the mids and above. So with that being said, let's get started on the Ableton template. All right, guys, so the first thing we're going to talk about are the keys, or panels and keys. So I got the sample. Most of them are going to be samples from like Splice, just for convenience. You know, I'm not going to be Johnny Beethoven over here. So what I first did is a subtractive EQ, right? So let's get rid of all that unnecessary low end. So let's hear this. Want to get rid of all this down here. Then I do a compression. I did OTT in this case, and I just put it about 40%. Usually 30 to 40% is my sweet spot. You go overboard, it just sounds squashed, which has its purpose, but not here. And a little bit of saturation. All I did here is I put it at about 40%, put the drive up to 4, and then got rid of some of the low end here, so it makes it a little cleaner. So reverb and delay is the next part of the chain here. And what happens when you put it direct, right? See how it pushes it all the way to the back, like you're in a hall? Now that's cool if you're trying to actually push things into the back of the mix. But the problem is if you want that clarity, you're going to want to do it in a return track. So let's say you're here in the mixer, you would just right click here on this section and then just put insert return track. I already have one here, but let's just say you were to bring this reverb here. You want to make sure that the dry wet is at 100%. And then, it's a little heavy. Then you could put your decay. Typically a little higher, not too much. You don't want too much reverb because you're gonna get problems with the muddiness because it lingers. And then you could just mess with your settings here. But look at the difference. I just want to show you. It makes a huge difference here. So this is with it directly on the channel. Right. This is with the return track. You see how you still have that presence? That's why it's really important for these time-based effects to be on the return track. You could do that with any of the effects that you may have on here, but typically I use a return track only for time-based effects like delay and reverb. But, you know, I've seen people use it for compression or whatever it may be. Use it however you'd like, you know, experiment, but these are just general guidelines. Yeah, then you do your sidechain. Right? And I just wanted to highlight something here. I recently came across this plugin from actually a newer company. It's called Spice. And what I really like is that you have all the signal flow kind of set up for you here. And I really enjoy that because it makes things easier when you're trying to achieve a quick workflow. So one of the things I like is obviously, you know, you have all your different types of effects here, but I really like how they have a pitch setting, high cut, low cut, and then a stereo imaging to get some width. Black pepper, which is pretty much kind of like a vinyl sound in the background. If you're trying to get that lo-fi effect, right? You got this flutter effect. Really cool if you're trying to achieve a different type of modulation sound. Same thing here. You got flanger, chorus, right? Phaser. Then you have your saturation right here too, so you can even get rid of this one. And just mess around with all the settings here. Reverb and delay. And just bunch of different options. So this is like a one-stop shop. I really like it. You can use it on vocals. I've experimented on synths, and funny enough, even my bass. And it works out pretty good. You know, if you want something dirty, you throw a little distortion in there, and it adds that heat, and warmth that you're looking for. So I really like this plugin. I think you guys should check it out. They have some good presets too. Some little microdose. You know what I'm saying? So really cool. Really enjoy this plugin. Something you guys should consider checking out. I don't know if they're gonna have some Black Friday sale or like holiday sale, but I'll leave a link down below so you guys can go on the website and check it out for yourself. All right, the next one is gonna be vocals. So once again, I went to our trusty friend Splice, and I got this vocal sample here.
Stayed out all night, hit the ground running.
Now, when you go into Splice, a lot of things are going to be processed already, but sometimes you need a little more color, maybe a little more control. So the first thing I like to do is reduction, right? Get rid of all the unnecessary low end. For this vocal, I didn't go too aggressive on the cut. I didn't make like a straight cut like that, but that's the first thing I do. The second thing that I like to do is I'll have some sort of compressor that tames the peaks, right? That way you have more control, or seem like you have more control over your track and more consistency. So the one I use is a CL2A, and I just do a little bit of a peak reduction, maybe a little makeup gain. So this is what it does.
Stayed out all night, hit the ground running. Superstar, keep the good times coming.
Right?
Stayed out all night, hit the ground running. Superstar.
Right, and it's reducing the volume a little bit, but you know, you're controlling the peaks. The next thing I like to do is the next two are for tone. So this one is just an additional layer of compression, and then there's also some EQing options here, which are good, you know, like the default preset here, but I just made some modifications. I put it to push so it's not too aggressive, put it up a little bit, and then put a little bit of reverb, and then a little bit of a delay on here. I really like CLA Vocals because it's a very versatile plugin. And by the way, guys, I'm not sponsored by any of these plugins I'm mentioning. I'm just giving suggestions based off of what I actually use. So when you add the color and both of them, it sounds like this.
Stayed out all night, hit the ground running. Superstar, keep the good times coming. Found
Now there's another one called CL76 or CLA76, and that one really adds a lot of tone and color to it. But for whatever reason, my plugin isn't working, so I can't show it here. I gotta figure that out because I actually use it in my production. And then also, if you want to, let's say, boost this area here, you can add a additive EQ.
Stayed out all night, hit the ground.
Right, that's where you would add those elements to it. Anything you want to reduce, just bring it down here. And then obviously the time-based effects, you would put the reverb on the return track.
Stayed out all night, hit the ground running.
So this is typically the way I would go about vocals. This one doesn't need a de-esser, so that's why I don't have it here or any of those other things, because when they recorded this vocal or this sample, to me it sounds like they already have that under control. So yeah, those are just some options and general guidelines that I wanted to give you guys. Typically the vocals, you want to keep it simple unless you're recording, which is a different animal. Anything for splice, right? Anything you're dragging and dropping as a sample, typically those things are already processed. But I'll probably make a series on vocals themselves and really dive in deep into that chain. I mean, there's probably going to be like 12 plugins at least, you know. So I'll do another lesson on that and how to record vocals and how to... All right, guys, next is the kick. So first and foremost, the most important thing before processing and doing all that stuff is make sure you get a good kick that fits your track. That's number one. If you get a good sample that fits your track, that fits the vibe, the mood, the mix, you don't really have to process. Don't feel like you have to process your kicks all the time. Sometimes it's not even necessary. There's been times where I didn't have to do anything. But let's say you were going to process it. I just threw a couple things in here just to demonstrate. This is what I would do. Now, earlier when I was showing up that Word doc, I was saying that it wasn't a one-size-fits-all. And that is correct because I moved some things around, right? These things are a little out of order based off of what you saw on the Word doc. Now, this is the order that I thought sounded best. I don't have a track around it, so I can't really tell. The first thing I did here is I added a transient shaper. It was by Kiloheart. I just wanted more of a transient, so I just put that tack up. And without it, it sounds like this. Very minimal, but this is how it sounds like. Very minimal. It's putting the attack up just a little bit. So next, I put a saturator, and I just remove all the low end here, and then for the mids and above, I added the saturation, so it sounds like this. A little more body. All right. And then I put a Pro MB at the end, which there's a really cool preset here called Punch Wide Love. I really like this one. It adds a little bit of control without overdoing it, and it's added presence on my kick, especially with this multi-band compression going on here at the high end. So a little bit of control, a little more sustain. Still has some dynamics, not too squashed. I really like it. So that's typically the way I would go about processing my kicks. It's a little different every time, but I just want to give you guys a rundown of the way I perceive it, and then you can be the judge of how you want to do it. All right, next is bass. This one is a little more on the important side, but I don't do too much on this. For a sub bass that really drives the track, I try to keep it as simple as possible, as you can see here. So obviously, I have my main signal here, which is Serum, a little sub sandwich. That's what I call that preset. Then I like to add a saturator. I like the drum bus. It does a really good job. Just make sure not to mess with the boom because that adds more sustain, and yeah, it gets a little muddy and messy. And then for the EQ, I cut it at 180 hertz with the harsh cut. And then I just added a really aggressive side chain here to make sure that the kick punches through. Now, really important thing here. Let's hear it with the processing, and then I'll show you why signal flow matters. So give me a second here. Let's hear it out. All right. This is with nothing. Right? This is the chain I have now. Let's just say you were to do a subtractive EQ first, which is fine, but you don't have another one after the fact that you boost it. Even though you cut this, some of this information still pops up. So you'll see. See? Look how clean it sounds. This is why signal flow is so important, because even if, for example, you had a reverb back here, which you wouldn't have it on a bass, but let's say you had another instrument and you put the saturator after the reverb, it's gonna make it super distorted, and you don't want that. So you really want to watch out on the order that you put things, because it really makes a difference in your sound. Even though you cut this beforehand, if you put this over here, it's just gonna bring all those elements back, and you have to cut again. So when you boost things, just be mindful. From a saturated and distortion perspective, be mindful that some of these elements may come back into the mix. So just wanted to really share that. All right, we're moving on to synths. So for synths, same thing, remove any unnecessary low end, especially under 200 hertz. I don't think that's going to be needed in a full track, at least in the drop area. Then I like to do a little OTT, 30%, right? Then I'll do a saturator after the fact. And like I mentioned, if you like the saturator or the distortion before the OTT, that's fine. But typically I like it after the fact because it makes it a little louder and a little more present. But that's just me. And then for the sidechain, I didn't go too ham. I just, 60% of the way. Then I put the return track, right? With how we learned how to do that earlier. Put the reverb and the delay. And this is how it sounds like. So really cool stuff, real simple. All right, the next topic we're going to is percussions or top loops and so forth. So for percussions, if it's like, bongos and congas and all that stuff, you want to make sure that you have a little bit of a low end presence, just not too much. So I'll bring it down to 180 typically. And that way you still have that low end presence because it does have some dominating frequencies there. Just got to be careful with that on the drop. I typically like to do a low cut first and then a slight reverb, just a little bit on the channel just to push it to the back of the mix sometimes. If you don't want it in the back of the mix, just get rid of it. You can even throw a saturator on here right before the EQ cut, just to make sure that, no unwanted frequencies come back up. And if you want more of a transient shaping, you can. All right. By the way, guys, this is free on I think it's kilohertz. And then for top loops, like let's just say there's no bongos, congas, anything with mids or low end, just remove everything here to about like 250 or 245. And then I'll add a little bit of auto pan so we can have some movement right or left, which sounds like this. Let me see right here. And this is going to help you get a little more space in the mix. All right. And it's also adding some movement too. So I really, really like adding the auto pan at the end. Very simple. I don't overdo the sitch here. A lot of these samples come processed already. Probably already some saturation and compression and stuff like that. So I don't really mess with it too much. It's just enough to make sure it sits in the mix. So yeah, very simple, guys. You know, keeping it simple, but adding the necessary techniques throughout the whole course of the project is really going to take you a long way. All that fancy stuff is cool, but if you follow this, you'll have pretty good sounding tracks. All right, so that's it. Those are the general guidelines. If you have any recommendations, guys, what works for you, please put that down below, whether it's something for the low end, whether it's something for an instrument, or even some side chaining techniques, whatever it is, put it down below. And of course, if you found this video to be useful, please consider subscribing. And if you'd like to support the channel, please go over to KarokoNation.com. I have the links down below. We have a couple sound banks to help you out with your production needs, high quality samples, and certain presets that I personally made myself. So once again, guys, thank you for all your support and watching, and I hope you have wonderful holidays, guys. Thank you.